Good evening, Internet, and all the ships at sea. This is Alexander Aaron, and I've decided to share a bit of a formative experience with you. I was actually kind of browsing around the Internet at random earlier today. This is not the formative experience, by the way. I haven't had any formative experiences in the last 24 hours. But I was browsing around the Internet at random when I came to a site called Bad Kids Jokes. This is a blog that is a repository of jokes that were submitted by children to a website of jokes for children, and these were the ones that did not make the cut. Okay, let me retrieve my mouse here. Now, you know what children's jokes tend to be like. What kind of pan can you eat? A pancake. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get the other side. These are the jokes that did not make the cut. What did the toilet say to the robot? I don't know, I wasn't there, was I? Your brain is a poop bomb, and you are a zombie, and you are naked with your butt on fire, and your butt is a girl's face, and you are wearing diapers. That's, I don't know, kind of going for a... I'm not sure if that's Zen or if it's Dada, but they're trying something there, and they're not quite pulling it off. Question. What did Batman say to Robin before they got in the car? Answer. Get in the car. A duck walks into a bar. A man runs out because it's unnatural to have a duck in a bar. That's the kind of caliber of joke we're dealing with. There was one of them that really jumped out at me because it reminded me of something from when I was a child. Actually, a lot of these remind me of things from when I was a child. The joke is this. What kind of person drinks beer? Wait for it. A drunk one. Obviously, the child who penned this particular joke has some problem with the concept of causality or order of operations, because you aren't necessarily drunk when you drink the beer. It would be more better phrased as, what does a drunk person drink? Beer, or something like that. I don't know. There are issues that go deeper than a simple rewording can. But anyway, the point is that this reminded me of something. I've been blogging more about my writing career again, which has some of my followers being like, oh, holy, I did not know you were a writer. And it's like, yeah. So the question that, one of the stereotypical questions that a lot of writers dread is, you got, where do you get your ideas, or what have you published that I would have seen, or things like that. But another one is, how did you get started? Nobody's ever asked me that one. That's not going to stop me from telling you. These bad children's jokes resonate with me because when I was very little, I did not have a very robust sense of humor. Or maybe it was... No, it was robust, I guess. It wasn't a very strict sense of humor. If I understood that something was a joke, it was inherently hilarious. I didn't have to know why it was funny. It didn't even have to be funny. Just the proper response to a joke is, man, that's funny. And then you laughed. So anytime I learned a new joke, I would ask somebody, usually my dad, to explain it to me. What's funny about this? I think this has a lot to do with my sense of humor today, where even people who like puns talk about bad puns. I cannot recognize a bad pun as being bad. I learned humor by rote, so if it's a joke, it's funny. If it's a pun, it's funny. Once I had learned the basic forms of humor, as understood by a 4-year-old child, I began, like many of the young budding writers who are submitting to this kids' joke site, I began to test the boundaries of known joke technology. For instance, I mentioned a joke at the start of this video. What kind of pan can you eat? And the answer is a pancake. Well, once I understood how that joke worked, I decided to take it apart and see if I could put it back together myself, to create my own joke that was a variation on that same simple yet elegant theme. And this was the best result I came up with after trying out a bunch of different variations on my parents. What kind of fork can you eat? A fork chop. It doesn't quite work, but the flaw was not as obvious to my 4-year-old self as it is now that I'm almost 33. So 29 years of hard-won experience have really improved my ability to recognize that pork does not start with an F. In any case, though, so that was how I got started writing jokes. That's not how I became a writer. A few years later, my dad had this habit of bringing home cast-off computers from his workplace when they upgraded. So we had this old, before there was Windows, when Microsoft's precursor to Windows was DOS. You didn't say, "Oh, I have a DOS computer," like you'd say, "Oh, I have a Windows computer or a PC." It was an IBM PC compatible. It wasn't, made by IBM, but they had set the standard. So we had an IBM PC compatible computer that ran DOS something point something. We used it. It was already out of date when we got it because it was an obsolete computer being cast off from an office. But we used it to play these shareware games that we bought on the giant floppy disks. Bookstores back in those days would actually have spinny racks that had discs where somebody had taken somebody else's game that was usually either free or used a shareware model where if you liked it, you were supposed to mail them a check. Kids today, just imagine if Steam worked on the honor system and via snail mail and this very improvised distribution channels. That's what we were dealing with. And a lot of the games that we played were completely text-based. They were text adventures where, I was going to mention Zork, but they weren't Zork. They weren't that caliber. Zork's the one that you might have heard of if you've never heard of any other text adventure. But or there are games where the graphics were made by using ASCII characters that just, little asterisks moving around on screen, or the extended ANSI set, which had little smiley faces the size and shape of an asterisk and things like that. So, when we discovered Microsoft's variants on the basic programming language and learned the very, very rough basics of it through tutorials in the back of 321 Contact magazine, it didn't seem too implausible that we could actually replicate some of these games and make some of our own. After all, we knew how to make text appear on the screen. These games were made out of text, so we made some even crappier text adventures, my brothers and I did, using like 3 different commands in the basic programming language. And one day, dissatisfied with an endless, giant branching monstrosity of if statements and go-to statements, I decided to make something a little less interactive, and just made a story where it appeared one line at a time, and then there would be a few seconds pause, and then there would be the closest I could manage to approximating a dramatic chord of music, playing a high-pitched computer tone, and there'd be another line that would appear. And at this time, I was reading a collection of Peanuts comics that I had checked out of the library that was centered around Snoopy and his attempts to become a writer. I believe the collection was entitled "It Was a Dark and Stormy Night" because that's how all of Snoopy's efforts began. That really cliched, horrible beginning to a novel that I did not know what it was from, but I'd already encountered it many times before reading this. Reading it as a small child, I did not understand that the point of the strips was that Snoopy was a terrible author. So I decided to start in the same place and weave a tale of horror and suspense and shock. And I don't remember exactly how it went. I don't think I could call to mind all of the 7 or 8 lines that it had. But the basic story was this. It was a dark and stormy night. And suddenly there's a knock on your door. And a man staggers in. And then there's a bunch of dots. And a longer pause. And then it's all in caps and it says, "It was a drunk man." And then it was in quotes. The next line had quotes around it, just so you knew that you understood. This is the sophisticated computer graphic technology I had at my disposal. I could put quotation marks around a line to indicate that the drunk man was speaking. He said, "I want to drink your beer." So, even though this was the pivotal, formative moment in my life as a budding writer, I did not think of this at all until I came to this Bad Kids joke site, and I found this joke that said, "What kind of person drinks beer? A drunk one." And then it all came rushing back to me. So I was very, very proud of my creation. So I showed it to my mom and my dad, and they looked at me and they said, "You know this thing has a word processor on it, right?" Which I did not. I did not even know what a word processor was. So they showed it to me. My dad loaded it up and showed it to me, and I was just entranced with it because, first of all, it was red and green because this was a CGA monitor. The computer could only display 3 colors and the black background at a time, and the 2 different modes. One of them was had, I can't remember all 3. I think it might have been yellow, but a shade of blue and green were the 2 ones that were used most prominently, and the other one was cyan, magenta, and white, which was the palette that was used for a lot of the we had the first 3 Ultima games and some other games that had actual tile graphics and 3-color graphics. It was we had a Nintendo that plugged into the TV and could use 8-bit graphics, but we were just, after having played all those text adventures on this computer, we were just astonished when we got some commercially produced games that had 4-color tile graphics. It was technology. Your level of amazement with technology is always relative. But anyway, so this word processor where I could write out a story without doing it line by line using print commands, and it was a lot easier to edit and go back and make changes and add stuff, and things could be saved and things could be printed. I immediately started writing my first fantasy novel. I don't remember much of it. We were also we'd gotten into Ultima. We were getting into Dungeons and Dragons. We had already gone through, even before I could read. We'd had the Chronicles of Narnia and The Hobbit and similar books read to us by our mother. So I threw myself into writing a fantasy novel. I was creating my first fantasy world at the age of probably about 8, maybe 9. It looked a lot like the worlds of the Ultima games and Dungeons and Dragons, not too surprisingly. There were a couple of departures. I imagine dragons being these elemental creatures. Like a water dragon would be made out of water, and an earth dragon would be made out of rocks, and I saw them as a sign of the planet's ecological health and killing the dragons would harm the planet and vice versa. And attentive viewers may notice that part of this formed the basis of the plot of the original Dungeons and Dragons movie that came out sometime in the 21st century. I'm not saying that the producers of that movie had our modemless, not at all online capable, pre-World Wide Web IBM PC computer under surveillance somehow, but I don't think we can rule it out. Still, yeah, I'm not going to sue to get my name on the credits of the Dungeons and Dragons movie. If anybody tries to attribute it to me, I will sue to have my name taken off. This plot, my first fantasy novel also spawned an argument with my older brother because I introduced a version of a fairy race into my world that was roughly human-sized and could fly without visible means of support, no wings or anything on the back, which was the first time I ever had an argument with a fellow fantasy geek over whether or not something counted as something, because he didn't think they counted as fairies. He said I could call them sprites or maybe pixies, but no way were they fairies. But I ended up being about 2 chapters in before I just stopped writing it. In the first chapter, one of the main characters, they were a pair of fairy brothers. One rescued the other one from a human jail where he'd been imprisoned for stealing apples. And in the second chapter, they made it back to their secret hideout in the woods where the older brother was killed by orc archers. And I never got as far as figuring out why the orcs were there, how they found the hideout, why they were killing them. But there was going to be reasons, and there was going to be a story, and it was going to be terribly exciting. And that's the story of how my writing career began. And that all came back to me because of the site with quality jokes like, what do you do if a dinosaur loves you? You hide. And is Neil Armstrong really strong? Probably, because his last name explains it all to me. And I like this one. I admire it for its honesty. When will the Leaning Tower of Pisa fall down? I don't know. That's like the one about the toilet and the robot that I read back at the beginning. Again, I just, it's straightforward, it's to the point, and it's honest. There's no messing around. And I've saved the best one for last. What do you do if a chicken comes in the house? And this is multiple choice. A. Kill it. B. Scream. Or C. Run to a chainsaw. The answer is C. Run to a chainsaw. Do not walk to the chainsaw. Run to the chainsaw, for a chicken is in your house. And I'm going to close the video out there because we're getting near the 20-minute mark. And that's an awful long time to listen to me tell really bad jokes and ramble about my childhood. This is Alexander Aaron for the Internet.